One brother was wounded. The other was a mile away across a deadly river. And the enemy was already moving through the cold dawn grass. Before the storm, Tao and Sol had moved like one animal divided into two bodies. They were mature male lions, heavy-maned and broad across the shoulders, born into the same dry season and hardened by the same land. Tao was the darker one, with a missing lower left canine tooth that showed whenever he breathed through parted jaws. Sol was slightly taller, paler around the muzzle and slower to anger, but every animal on that stretch of savanna knew that where one brother stood, the other was never far behind. Their territory ran along a river that was usually narrow enough to cross in the shallow bends. In the dry months, it was a ribbon of muddy water where zebra tracks hardened in the banks and egrets picked through the reeds. But after 3 nights of violent rain, the river had changed. It no longer moved like water. It moved like a living wall. At dawn, the world was blue-gray and cold, washed clean by storm and trembling under a thin skin of frost light. Mist dragged low over the grass. Broken branches floated past in the torrent. The savanna seemed quiet, but it was not peace. It was the silence that comes after something enormous has already happened. Tao and Sol had been patrolling before sunrise, following scent along the river line. They were not hunting. They were checking the edge of their world, the way territorial males do when a storm scrubs the land and rewrites every boundary. Then the bank gave way beneath Tao. The collapse was sudden and brutal. A slab of mud split from the edge, taking grass roots and stones with it. Tao twisted, clawed once at the falling earth, and dropped into the flood. Sol lunged toward him, but the river struck faster than muscle, faster than instinct. Tao vanished into brown water and white foam. For several seconds, Sol ran along the bank, roaring into the storm-churned dawn. Tao surfaced twice. The second time, his jaws opened in a hard breath, and the missing lower left canine flashed pale against the dark water. Then a fallen tree rolled between them, and the river carried him away. By the time the current threw Tao onto the opposite bank, he was no longer in his own territory. He was on the hostile side, beyond the river bend, in land marked by another coalition. He dragged himself out of the water with one hind leg failing beneath him. Mud covered his mane. His ribs moved hard. Behind him, the river kept roaring, cutting him off from the only lion who had always stood beside him. In the wild, separation is not only distance. Sometimes it is the beginning of danger. Ranger Malik found the first sign just after sunrise. He had been following flood damage along the reserve boundary, checking damaged culverts and broken fences with 2 other rangers in a mud-coated truck. The storm had torn through the valley with rare force, and every low crossing was either gone or buried under moving water. Then he saw the claw marks. They were deep, uneven, and dragged through the mud above the eastern bank. A large male lion had pulled himself out there, but not cleanly. One rear paw printed heavy. The other scraped. Malik stepped down from the vehicle and crouched beside the tracks. The mud was still wet inside the impressions. Fresh. He did not need to see the lion to understand the problem. A lone male on the wrong side of the river was vulnerable, especially if injured. Male lions can defend territory with terrifying force, but a single wounded male caught inside another coalition's range faces danger from every direction. He cannot move quickly. He cannot hunt well. He cannot bluff forever. Malik followed the tracks through flattened grass and storm debris. The morning stayed cold, that strange blue-gray light holding over the savanna as if the sun had not fully decided to rise. Vultures circled far off, not close enough to mean death, but close enough to make every ranger watch the horizon. The tracks led toward a shallow drainage channel where floodwater still moved through reeds. There Malik saw Tao. The lion lay half-hidden beneath a leaning acacia, his mane clumped dark with river mud. His flanks rose and fell. His left hind leg was stretched awkwardly, and dried blood had mixed with silt along the outer thigh. When Tao lifted his head, his mouth opened in a deep breath. The missing lower left canine showed clearly. Malik knew him then. Tao and Sol were known to the reserve teams, not as pets, not as tame animals, but as recognizable wild males who had held that Western River territory for years. Their partnership had shaped the behavior of everything around them. When they moved together, other males kept distance. When they roared at night, the sound crossed the floodplain like a warning carved from stone. But Tao was not roaring now. He watched Malik with yellow, exhausted eyes. There was no charge in him, only the terrible weight of an animal deciding whether standing was worth the pain. Malik kept his distance and spoke quietly to the team behind him, not because Tao could understand the words, but because calm human voices can steady human hands. The plan had to be careful. The lion was injured, the river was still dangerous, and across the water, somewhere in the reeds and broken grass, Sol was still cut off. Then Malik heard it. A low roar rolled from the west bank, faint under the river. Sol. Tao's ears moved. His head lifted higher. The response was small but unmistakable. The wounded lion had heard his brother. For a moment, the distance between them felt almost cruel. A mile of water, mud, and torn branches stood between two animals that had built their survival on closeness. Tao tried to push himself upright, but his hind leg buckled. He sank back onto the wet ground, breathing through parted jaws, the broken shape of his missing tooth visible with every breath. Then the radio on Malik's shoulder crackled. Another ranger, positioned farther north, had seen movement. Two rival males entering the eastern floodplain. The storm had not only separated Tao from Sol, it had opened a door. By mid-morning, the rescue had become a race. The rival males were not running, and that made them more dangerous. They moved with the slow certainty of lions that knew the land belonged to them. Their manes were wet at the edges. Their paws sank into soft mud. They stopped often to scent mark and listen. If they found Tao alone before he could cross back, the fight would not be fair. Malik made the decision at the riverbank. They could not herd Tao across. The current was still too violent, and an injured lion would drown before reaching the far side. They could not leave him and hope the river dropped by evening. The rival coalition was too close. The only chance was to sedate him, carry him onto a heavy-duty inflatable raft, and guide him across the narrowest but most dangerous bend. It was not a gentle solution. It was a necessary one. The veterinary team arrived in a second vehicle, wheels sliding through mud. Malik helped position the dart rifle from behind the open door, using the truck as cover. Tao had shifted into the shade, his head low but eyes awake. The dart had to be placed cleanly, enough to sedate a 400-pound lion without leaving him conscious during transport or dangerously oversedated near water. The shot cracked softly. Tao flinched as the dart struck the heavy muscle of his shoulder. He surged up with a growl that rolled through the reeds, then stumbled 3 steps before the injured leg gave. Malik and the vet waited, counting breath, watching posture, watching the tail, watching the eyes. Sedation in a wild lion is never casual. It is a narrow bridge between risk and mercy. Slowly, Tao's head lowered. His body settled into the grass. His breathing deepened. Only then did the team move. They approached from behind and to the side, careful of the head, careful of the paws, careful of the sheer power that still lived inside the sleeping body. Malik knelt near Tao's mouth and watched the rhythm of breath. The missing lower left canine was visible even now, a small absence that made the great animal suddenly specific, known, and fragile. The vet checked the wound along the thigh. It was not a deep gash, but the leg had been strained hard in the flood, perhaps twisted against submerged debris. Tao could recover if he survived the day. That was the thin mercy they had been given. The raft waited at the water's edge, tethered by 2 ropes and weighted with equipment. For Rangers and the vet worked together to slide a heavy canvas stretcher beneath Tao's body. Even sedated, he was immense. Mud smeared their sleeves. The grass flattened beneath their boots. Every movement had to be coordinated, because a lion's weight is not like a bundle that can be adjusted easily. It is muscle, bone, mane, and gravity. At the river, the roar of water swallowed every small sound. The raft dipped when they loaded him. Malik stepped in last, one hand on the stretcher frame, the other gripping the raft line. Across the torrent, the far bank appeared and disappeared behind mist and spray. Somewhere beyond it, Sol was waiting. The crossing began with a violent shove from the current. The raft swung sideways, straining against the rope. Water slapped over the rubber edge. One ranger on the bank fed the line while another downstream held the safety rope tight. Malik leaned his weight over Tao's shoulders to keep the stretcher centered. The sedated lion's mane moved in the wind. His chest rose and fell under Malik's hand. Halfway across, a broken branch slammed into the raft. The impact spun them toward the current. Malik dropped to one knee, gripping the stretcher as the raft tilted. Water surged over his boots. For a few seconds, the river seemed to take control of everything. The raft, the ropes, the men, the sleeping lion, the entire fragile plan. Then the downstream rope caught. The raft jerked hard, corrected, and angled toward the western bank. Malik looked down at Tao. The lion was still breathing, still alive, still on his way back. The river had taken one brother from the other. Now human hands were trying to give him back. They reached the far bank in a crash of mud and foam. Rangers pulled the raft into a shallow pocket behind a cluster of reeds where the current lost some of its force. Malik climbed out first, boots sinking to the ankle, and helped drag the stretcher onto firmer ground. The vet checked Tao again, then prepared the reversal drug but did not administer it immediately. They needed distance from the river. They needed cover. They needed to know where the rivals were. A roar answered before the radio did. It came from the eastern side first, harsh and close. The rival males had reached the opposite bank. They could not cross easily, but they could see movement, smell lion, smell humans, smell weakness. One stepped onto a raised mound of mud and stared across the flood. His mane was dark with rain. His tail flicked once. Then he roared again. Tao's ear twitched. The sedative was beginning to thin. Malik and the team moved him farther from the waterline, into the cover of reeds and storm-bent grass. The vet injected the reversal into the thick muscle of Tao's shoulder. Then everyone backed away, giving space, staying behind the vehicles where possible. A waking lion is one of the most dangerous sights in the natural world. Not because he is cruel, but because confusion and instinct can ignite faster than thought. Tao's paws flexed first. His whiskers trembled. His head rolled once against the grass. Then his eyes opened, unfocused and amber in the cold light. He tried to stand. The first attempt failed. His front legs pushed, but the hindquarters lagged, and he dropped heavily onto one side. Across the river, the rival males paced and called, their voices bouncing against the floodwater. Tao lifted his head toward them. His lips parted. The missing canine showed. A low, broken growl came from his chest. Then the reeds behind Malik moved. At first, it was only a ripple through wet grass. Then a pale mane appeared between the stems. Sol stepped out of the reeds with his body low and his shoulders rolling, as if he had been carved from the dawn itself. He did not rush to Tao like a human might imagine. Wild animals do not waste movement on ceremony. Sol walked in a curve, eyes on the rival males across the river, then angled toward Tao until he stood between his brother and the threat. He lowered his head and breathed, taking in Tao's scent beneath the mud, the medicine, the river. Tao pushed again. This time he got his front legs beneath him. His wounded hind leg trembled. Sol remained beside him, shoulder forward, body blocking the line of sight from across the water. The rival males roared from the far bank, frustrated by the flood but drawn by the scent of weakness. Sol answered. His roar was not long. It did not need to be. It was deep, full, and close enough to vibrate through the doors of the Ranger vehicle. Tao lifted his head beside him, still unsteady, still half-dazed, but alive. He added a rougher call, shorter and lower. Together, the two voices crossed the water. The rival males hesitated. They had come expecting one injured lion. They had found a coalition. For several minutes, the standoff held in the blue-gray morning. River between them, reeds shaking in the wind. Two strangers on one bank, two brothers on the other. Malik watched from behind the vehicle, one hand still resting on the empty dart case, knowing he was witnessing something older than rescue, older than science, older than any name humans give to loyalty. Sol did not touch Tao, but he stayed close enough that their manes brushed when the wind shifted. Tao's breathing steadied. His tail moved once through the wet grass. He turned his head towards Sol, and for a brief second, the missing tooth showed again as he drew in the scent of his brother. Some bonds in the wild are not gentle. They are practical, physical, and earned across seasons of hunger, danger, and night. But when the world breaks open, those bonds become shelter. The rival males left first. They did not flee. Lions rarely surrender their dignity so easily. They turned from the river one at a time, moving back through the soaked eastern grass with slow, irritated steps. The flood still cut the land in two, but the opportunity had closed. Tao was not alone anymore. On the western bank, Sol remained standing until the last dark mane disappeared beyond the acacias. Only then did he turn fully toward Tao. The wounded lion was upright now, though his weight favored the injured leg. Mud dried in rough patches along his mane and shoulder. His eyes were clearer. He took one step, paused, and took another. Sol walked beside him, not pressing, not leading too far ahead, simply matching the pace of an animal that could not yet move as he once had. Malik stayed by the vehicle and did not follow. His work was finished, and the rest belonged to the lions. The brothers moved through the cold dawn grass in the direction of their old patrol route. Their bodies formed the familiar shape the Rangers had seen so many times before. Sol slightly ahead and left, Tao slightly behind and right, a loose V cutting through the savanna. It was not perfect now. Tao limped. The line wavered. The storm had left debris everywhere, and every few steps he had to adjust his balance. But the shape was there. The river still roared behind them. The sky began to pale above the clouds. Frost light softened into morning. Birds returned to the torn reeds. The land, battered and rearranged, began its slow work of continuing. Malik watched until the lions grew small against the horizon. He thought of the flood, the raft, the weight of Tao's breathing under his hand, and the moment Sol had emerged from the reeds without hesitation. In the work of wildlife rescue, humans often arrive only at the edge of a much older story. They intervene for a few minutes, maybe an hour, and then the wild closes around the animal again. That was how it should be. Tao and Sol did not become symbols because humans needed them to be. They were lions, bound by instinct, history, and survival. Yet for anyone who saw them that morning, their return carried a meaning difficult to ignore. A brother is not always the one who saves you before you fall. Sometimes, he is the one waiting across the impossible distance, ready to stand between you and whatever comes next. A brother is the shield you did not know you had until the world tried to break you. And maybe that is why the sight of Tao and Sol walking away stayed with Malik long after the river dropped and the grass dried again. Not because the wild had become gentle, but because it had revealed one of its oldest truths. Survival is not always solitary. Strength can have another body. Courage can arrive through reeds. Loyalty can stand beside you before you are strong enough to stand alone. What would you risk to cross back to the one creature who had never abandoned you? In the end, Blood of the Savanna is not only a story about two lions and a flooded river. It is a story about the bonds that hold when the land collapses beneath us, about the quiet courage of those who help without owning the outcome, and about the rare gift of being seen, defended, and returned to where we belong. For more cinematic animal stories of survival, loyalty, and the hidden wisdom of the wild, subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and leave a like if this story stayed with you.